So does anybody remember what lessons we heard on March 25th? Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, I actually had to go back and look up exactly when this occurred, but I knew that it was in the recent past. Because as I read the gospel this week, I distinctly remember thinking two things. The seed again. Didn't I just preach on the seed? Which I did on March 25th. And it was from the Gospel of John. But regardless, it was a parable about a seed. All I could think was, I am so not preaching on the seed again. And I also remember thinking, couldn't Jesus come up with something besides a seed? With all the people and the places and the things in the universe at his disposal, you would think he could come up with a better metaphor in his parables. And I also thought that any high school English literature teacher would have had a field day with his lack of creative liberties in all these parables. However, it has been my experience that Jesus is fairly sneaky. So just when you think you got it, the seed, I totally know where he's going with this, he probes us with a question, which disarms my whole irritation with the seed. Because Jesus asks, with what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable will we use for it? Which is a zinger. Because Jesus asks me and asks you what we think. What would I use? What parable would I write? I'm supposed to think about this and actually have an answer for Jesus, because apparently we're doing it together. Well, frankly, I have no idea. I thought that this was about the seed, which at this point I'd rather just go with the whole metaphor of the seed thing. It seems much easier. But apparently, as many of us know, following Jesus is not always easy. He wants us to think, and to look, and to write, and to dream. And to have something to say about what the kingdom of God looks like. So he wants a parable. Well, I can do that. And I'm fairly task-oriented. So I've heard modern-day parables before, so I looked at the lessons, and I thought I would get a template. You know, like you learn in your English literature class, there's the form and the function and the introduction and the climax and the resolution. I figured that if I could just find all the elements of the parable, then I could figure out how to write my own parable. And there are two parables in the Gospel of Mark today. In the first parable, the seed is scattered, and in the second, the seed is sown. In the first one, distribution is unintentional, and in the second one, distribution is intentional. And then there's the fact that sometimes the seed gets harvested, and sometimes what the seed produces is left as it is. So none of the details, really, of the parables are the same. So how am I supposed to know what the kingdom of God looks like, or what type of parable to use if there's no consistency? And to make matters more perplexing, at the end of the gospel, it reminds us that Jesus spoke in many such parables. So apparently they're all confusing and different. But I did note one thing, that Jesus was using common, everyday, seemingly insignificant happenings to convey something of significance. And not even just significance. He was using our lives to convey the life of God, the kingdom and the dream and the vision. So still focused on Jesus' question about what a parable what parable I would write with him, I decided to do what Jesus was doing. Look around and see if I could find a parable that was already woven into my life about the kingdom of God. Jesus said, the kingdom of God is like a baseball game for 10-year-olds, which is played in the dirt and the grass with balls and bats, yet yields greater victories than the scoreboard tallies. My modern day kingdom of God parable. So maybe I need to explain why. For me, this evokes the kingdom of God, and maybe that's half the point, to be able to speak to the why. Because although we don't get the explanation directly about the seed from Jesus, he does go and explain it to the disciples in private. Maybe when they could hear the whole story. And I think that that would be a fascinating discussion to sit in on. And that may very well be the point of finding your own parable of the kingdom of God, so that when someone asks you, what's the point of it all, you could have a fascinating discussion about your parable. Wouldn't you learn so much about me and my faith and the things that I hold dear if I told you about the baseball parable? And wouldn't you also hear about how God seeps into each crevice of life, and how somehow it all works together to bring about God's dream for this spinning blue and green globe which is stationed in a universe which is much grander than our vision? Isn't it true? The subtext of the parable is what life is all about. So why? Why is the kingdom of God like a baseball game? Well, firstly, you need to know that I love baseball. Like, I really love the entirety of the game. And it doesn't have to be Major League Baseball for me to scream my lungs out either. So the other day, as I sat preparing to watch Cooper's baseball game, the refrain of "the kingdom of God is like a baseball game" kept playing over and over in my head. But I just didn't know why. It seemed true. It felt true. But I couldn't quite figure out why it was like the kingdom of God. And then I heard it. I heard the coach say, "Hey, Coop, square up. Give him a target. Show him where to throw that ball." Cooper was the catcher. And the coach's words were strong, but not mean, guiding Cooper into the proper position so that he could help out his teammate, who was struggling up there on the pitcher's mound. A coach doesn't know which words will stick with the child years later and which will not. The coach doesn't know exactly how the child will hear those words, whether they will be heard as critique or encouragement. And he also doesn't really know how his presence will impact their lives. A coach calls out from knowledge, knowing little of the outcome. He scatters. And as I listened, supporting them from the bleachers, the next kid came up to bat. And he was standing there and he was nervous, trying not to step out of the batter's box when a hard, fast ball came whirling at him. His teammates were screaming from the dugout at him, "We want a single, just a little single." And what determination as he stood there. Who knows what will come of this, if they still stand there doing their part. There was this amazing interplay of helping and supporting one another. But the boys weren't the only part of this parable. In the stands were the parents on one side, screaming things like, "Let's go, big train," and the other parents on the other side encourage their children. Except that doesn't speak so much about the kingdom of God as when the parents and the coaches on both sides erupted cheering because someone had just made an awesome play. And it was an awesome play no matter whose side you were on. Or when they all clapped encouragement for the kid that you knew had just struck out for the third time and it just wasn't his day. There's promise of harvest as a child grows in love and faith. And it could leave it at that, but that's not all there is. Because somebody lost and somebody won. And I don't really think that winning and losing is God's dream. But there is heartache in the world. And it hurts to lose in baseball. And there is great joy in the world. It's a lot of fun to win in baseball. The undeniable truth within our faith is, yes, joy and celebration, but also heartache and loss. That is the kingdom of God. Our hearts only ache when we love something. And there is no doubt that love of neighbor and enemy and God is the goal of the kingdom. So this may be the exact reason why the parable of baseball works for me. Because I grew up watching baseball, and my dad coached the game, and my brother played the game all the way through college, and my son plays the game. And I even played for a little while when girls just didn't play baseball. And my parents sponsored our team because nobody else would. And we got to be the Stephen Flyers because my parents were pilots. I spent many, many hours of my life on or at a baseball field. And so when I watch a game, I'm not just watching the game. I'm participating in all the love that I have known, and all the love that is to come. The scattering, and the guiding, and the supporting, and the growing, and the heartache, and the sacrifice, and the loving are all intermingled out there. It's played writ large there in front of me on the field of dreams. Now for sure, the kingdom of God is more complex than a baseball game analogy, or a piñata, or a child's first birthday, which are all the other parables that I saw this week. And for sure, the kingdom of God is grander than a mustard seed, or a sower, or the cedar trees of Lebanon, or a bird in a nest. And still he uses these insignificant seeds of life to grow pieces of him. So how will you answer the question of Jesus? What parable shall we write? And how will you explain your parable to those who ask? And truthfully, they may not even ask about the kingdom anymore. Because much of what has been spun into the world of God doesn't illustrate what the parable of the seeds seek to evoke, which is growth and patience and love and promise. Unfortunately, God's been spun and reduced to a political puppet or a fantastical genie. And so we need to tell our parables. What story in your life is being prepared so that it can branch out and drop seed and hold nests of those who stumble into your field where you stand? Write the parable, because God's got the ink all ready to go.